Welcome to the DesignRush podcast. I'm your host, Bianca Mayer. In 2024, SEO isn't just about topping search results, it's about crafting experiences. With 58% of searches coming from mobile devices, the stakes for optimized, engaging content are higher than ever.
So we ran through basically this 4-part audit. A lot of people think about SEO audits as technical. You pump them through Ahrefs or SEMrush or Screaming Frog and basically look at technical issues. That's one dimension we use. We actually look at 4.
Google now emphasizes user-focused content, with its latest updates pushing for pages that satisfy searcher intent and offer enhanced user engagement. This pivot aims to ensure that quality content that truly answers users' needs ranks higher.
We've always indexed on the long game. We literally call our podcast the long game, and one of our core principles listed on our website is play long-term games with long-term people. And I'm thinking about updating one of our principles and basically, because this has been a core value of ours.
Today, Alex Burkett discusses why investing in comprehensive, audience-first SEO strategies is a must. We'll delve into the importance of understanding user behavior, the impact of mobile optimization, and how authentic content can drive meaningful interactions.
They're just like chasing everything Google says, and they're like, oh, they like put out this statement. Oh, and this leaked thing, and like, oh, did you see the third paragraph in this line? Does this suggest that this is a ranking factor now? And it's like, who cares?
Stick around and don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful discussions with industry leaders. Let's get started. Alex, thank you so much again for joining us on the DesignRush podcast. We are super keen to get your insights, on all things growth marketing. A warm welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about content and SEO.
Amazing. Okay, so let's start by talking about the work that you did with Jasper AI. Now, I'm really interested to know, Alex, what strategies did you employ in Jasper's content production to facilitate, a 800% boost in organic sessions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this may be interesting in that it's so boring that it's going to be surprising, but it was really just bread and butter. Good content, good SEO, good fundamentals of technical SEO and website infrastructure, and a great partnership with the company. And then there's this magic ingredient, which is timing, right? Jasper came out of the gate before ChatGPT was on the market. They had just gotten access, I believe, to OpenAI, the API. And I knew the founder, he was running a different company at the time called Proof. And he's like, hey, man, I think we have a huge opportunity here. And actually, this is a very secret ingredient that not a lot of people think about, but they committed very heavily from the start. They're like, we want to take advantage of this opportunity. We want to make sure that we've got this content production velocity that allows us to get in front of the market before everybody else catches up. And then really it was just applying best practices to, good product-led content, everything related to pain points and use cases, even before some of the market had terminology around AI content writers. The search volume grew for those terms, which helped us as well. But a lot of it was based on just, good customer research, SEO research, product alignment, and then a high velocity of both backlinks and blog posts.
You just mentioned something that really stuck out to me is that, they wanted to get it out ahead of the market before everybody catches up, right? So this might be a little bit controversial, but how do you see that has worked out for them with how ChatGPT has kind of taken, or OpenAI in general has taken over the AI or generative AI market right now? Like I said earlier in our conversation before we just started this, I feel like I was working on Jasper, way before ChatGPT for articles, generating articles and content. So how do you think that's affected Jasper at the moment?
It's really hard for me to say, and I would almost look at ChatGPT in a different universe. I would compare Jasper to a lot of the other AI content tools that were coming out at the market at the time. And in response to that, I think they've done exceedingly well. I think they're one of the biggest brand names. There's probably a couple others that you could riff off the top of your head, like Writer. Writer's kind of got a different use case. They're very enterprise focused. I think they've got a different feature set, and Copy AI has done super well. Also, they've executed very well, but there was probably a dozen probably more. I mean, honestly, it was probably like 100 tools that were doing very similar things at the start. And Jasper is one of the few that you still kind of like talk about and know, and has a very big user base. They're very successful as a company today. I think ChatGPT is probably, I mean, South Park created an episode about ChatGPT, right? They're the mainstream, they're like the Google, they're like the metonym, the brand name that you think about. So I think those are two different, obviously, kind of stratospheres. And then like they all kind of started out on OpenAI on their platform, but I look at them in two different veins. And then there's different use cases too, right? And I can't speak to like Jasper's business strategy. I don't have that knowledge, and if I did, I couldn't share it. But I think they're trying to sell to teams, and there's different use cases than ChatGPT, which is a little bit more consumer, even though they've got their enterprise version now. But they're building different offerings and different capabilities within the platform.
Okay, so just getting back to the work that you did with them, right? How did you ensure that the content remained super high quality and relevant while still scaling up, especially so that the website, doesn't start going down eventually?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it goes back to our processes, which we're a relatively small agency, but we've always believed in the value of process and SOPs. And quality is a subjective term in many cases, but we try to be as objective as possible with the standards that we put out. We've got multiple dimensions that we gauge quality on for a piece of content. It's going to be basically like your audience dimensions, your brand and your brand POV dimensions, how you specifically speak about the topics. Of course, the SEO guardrails, we've got minimum viable scores there. And then conversion and product tie-ins. So we basically hit those bars on every piece of content that we published. And then in terms of the velocity, our process is so scalable. We've got, the guy leading our editorial, Sam Lund, is he's got a background in Six Sigma. He's a green belt, so he's like very process focused. And I think we were doing a couple dozen blog posts and pages per month, which seems like a lot, and it is a lot for a startup. At Jasper's scale in the beginning, like that was incredible. Like that was like, you're going to do that much out of the gate, but we can go much higher. So like for us, that didn't really stress test the systems that much, but really it was just building in sort of objective criteria that says like, this is what a good piece of content looks like. And if it didn't hit that bar, don't publish it. And then more tactically speaking, we always interweave a lot of subject matter expertise into the content. It's not going to be a generic piece of content written by somebody who hasn't used the AI tools, who hasn't done the things. It's kind of easy because it's also like, it's marketers writing to marketers. So it's not as hard as some spaces like developer tools or something like that. But we've always had an emphasis on building in subject matter expertise into the pieces that we write. And it's all product led, right? So everything we were writing kind of springs from a product feature or capability or a use case. So it was always very relevant to what the company was selling as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So when you say a good piece of content, right, like what were the standards that you guys were setting, or the check boxes that really drove you or showed the path for what these needed to look like?
This might be a little too in the weeds for me to answer at this point, but I can tell you generally how we do it, which is we're going to basically come to a handshake agreement on some of those brand and audience dimensions. Basically, does this speak, is there like that je ne sais quoi that speaks to the end user or the target user? So we do a lot of work up front, identifying and refining and really crystallizing the ICP and buying group, and specifically catering a piece to specific audiences. Sometimes it'll hit multiple audiences. So getting away from Jasper for a moment, if we're working with, say, like a data company that sells data quality software, they may sell to data engineers, but they may also sell to the business owner or the business user who's going to be basically signing the check or making the decision. And we make sure that before we write a piece of content, we define that, the language they'll use, what pain points they'll have. So that's interwoven into the content as well. And then the SEO guardrails are a little bit more straightforward. You can use tools like ClearScope or Surfer and basically check the box, so to speak, on some of the on-page SEO dimensions. But then there's the whole double EAT, and like different criteria that we have in terms of like, it's just like more of a heuristic audit that we'll run through. And this goes through, we've got, I think, 5 stages in our content production process. I might be getting that wrong, 5 or 6. And that'll basically be part of that, where we say like, is this up to snuff? If not, editors will basically go back and revise it until it gets to that point.
Okay, very cool. Okay, so in creating content, just on the same sort of topic, how did you decide on topics that really aligned with both the user interest and SEO potential?
Yeah, totally. And this is one of those things that evolved because the industry got more mature as we worked with them. So as ChatGPT became popular, we could piggyback on some of those terms like ChatGPT alternatives or basically branded searches or basically like alternative searches that didn't exist when we started doing it. So we looked at what use cases people may be able to use AI content generators for. And you think about that, you're like, well, pretty much anywhere somebody's writing. So we can look for search volume for some of those things like how to write a good LinkedIn bio, how to write a Twitter thread, how to write a novel, how to write a outline for a blog post, right? And then we basically figured out how we could interweave the product in a tasteful way into some of those blog posts. And then there were a couple, I would say, like category, like very product focused terms at the beginning. They just were lower volume than they are now. Things like AI blog post, AI writer. And you're just, you're using search volume and like the tools like Ahrefs and SEMrush to find some of those. There were some preliminary or like even earlier companies that were doing some of these terms using AI, and we would look, content gap analysis at like organic competitors to find some of these things.
Okay. And how did you really modify, or do you modify businesses' content strategy to really fit like best SEO practices and to really like improve visibility effectively? I mean, where do you start when doing that?
Well, we need to diagnose what the problem is first and what their goals are. So basically, we want to orient ourselves in space and time and say, all right, where is your North Star objective? Like, where could you be? Where do you think you could be? And we can do some of that with basically competitor analysis and building out a search TAM. We can also build out topic clusters and see what the overall volume would be if they were to compete effectively and like hit a 10 out of 10, right? Where's the potential? And then where do they currently exist? And then we can build basically a content inventory. We can look at everything on their website and we can judge that by various dimensions. So you've got basically on page or content quality, the coverage of the terms themselves. Like sometimes you come in and it's a business that does, I don't know, like quiz software, and they're writing about everything. They're writing about like education and CRMs and like, they're all over the place, and they've basically built zero topical authority because they're so diluted. And whatever you find, like the solution could be different. So you're really trying to ask the question like, all right, so in relation to this goal, where you could be or where you want to be and where you are now, what are the blockers that are preventing you from getting there? What are the strengths that we can index on to exploit to get you there faster? Like if you've got a very powerful old domain with a lot of backlinks, right? It may just be a matter of publishing more content. If you've got a backlog of pretty bad or weak content with a lot of keyword cannibalization, then it may be a matter of pruning the content inventory, redirecting pages, beefing up thin posts. And then it may be targeting backlinks to specific pages or building internal links or technical SEO. But we're basically doing a diagnostic process to figure out what the actual issue is. And in terms of patterns, like there's not like a most common issue. It's kind of different across the board. But we look on all those dimensions to make sure that we're optimizing and focusing our attention on the right problem. A lot of people have sort of dogmas around that. They're like, oh, just publish more content or just build more links. But like, if you're HubSpot, do you need more links? Like, every kind of solution is different based on the problem.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and we'll get to that in a bit as well. We'll elaborate on that. But Alex, I do wonder though, like, do you have like a recent example of, say for instance, where you had to redo or recheck like a company's content strategy and revamp their SEO stuff, and if there were any challenges there and how you sort of overcame those?
Yeah, we do this quite a bit actually. It's part of our content optimization offerings. I'm trying to think how I can do this without giving like very specific examples. I'll give you one that's generic, and it's interesting because it's an extremely large company that's very successful in many ways. Like the revenue is insane, but their SEO has been relatively immature from basically what you would expect. You're like, as a company this large, like how have you not published more? So we ran through basically this 4-part audit. So one part, a lot of people think about SEO audits as technical. You pump them through Ahrefs or SEMrush or Screaming Frog and basically look at technical issues. That's one dimension we use. We actually look at 4. So one's going to be share of search and your visibility in relation to both competitors, as well as the topics and the customer journey keywords. So we basically map those out and give you a visibility score. Related to that is your content inventory, which I had mentioned before, and that's going to be your existing content assets, both the coverage of topics as well as where they fit in the customer journey. So like maybe you're overweighted on top of funnel terms and underweighted on bottom funnel. Maybe you're overweighted on blog posts and underweighted on landing pages, right? Like it's going to be an allocation of what kinds of content as well as the quality of the content. Is it up to snuff in terms of on-page SEO, in terms of EAT? Like, do you have all these signals that would basically portray yourselves as a trustworthy source? And then there's technical and UX. We lump that into sort of the same category because it's based on like the infrastructure of your website and the readability and findability. And then there's off-page SEO. So backlinks, basically like how do you appear offsite? What are the off-page signals that's showing Google that you're a reputable source? And in this case, very large companies, so their off-page SEO is incredible. Their technical SEO is off the charts. It was one of the best I've seen. UX could use some work. The content they'd published was pretty good and was ranking. They just needed to publish more. And that was one case where we're like, actually, the solution is very simple. Not easy because there's a ton of organizational hurdles. Otherwise, you probably would have just been publishing content, right? Like you don't need like a genius or an SEO expert to basically say, hey, if you don't publish content, you're not going to rank for content and you're not going to attract visitors and you're not going to convert them. But we were basically we were able to quantify the largest opportunity and say, actually, don't even touch your off page. Don't even touch your technical. You can do micro tweaks as you go later on. Clearly, the biggest opportunity, if we wanted to bring you from like your current score to a 10 out of 10, like your share of search is like a 2 out of 10. So like publish more. And you've got all these keyword opportunities.
Now, I'm also interested to know, Alex, with the March Google updates, underway, how are you adjusting your strategies, for your clients at the moment?
This is going to be a really boring answer, but we're not adjusting them at all. We've always indexed on the long game. We literally call our podcast the long game, and one of our core principles listed on our website is play long-term games with long-term people. And to that end, I'm thinking about updating one of our principles and basically, because this has been a core value of ours, we've just never expressed it, but we optimize for the user. And this is something we've heard, various experts say, but it's like a lot of SEO experts on Twitter or LinkedIn, they're just like chasing everything Google says. And they're like, oh, they like put out this statement. Oh, and this leaked thing. And like, oh, did you see the third paragraph in this line? Does this suggest that this is a ranking factor now? And it's like, who cares? Like ultimately what they're trying to do, if you believe this, right? Like if you look at their incentives, it's like they're trying to align the best content to the user intent and create a good experience that allows users to basically use Google more and ostensibly click more ads and like bring Google more revenue as well. So if you just skip the platform, and obviously like there's some criteria that you need to basically, fit the mold as to what Google can identify as a ranking factor. And you just go and say like, what would the user want? They probably want information from a trustworthy source. Well, what is a trustworthy source? It's probably somebody who's done this thing before. It's like an expert. It's comprehensive. It answers the question to the query. So there's search intent alignment. If you just go straight to the endpoint, a lot of the long term, like you actually win over the long arc of history. So hopefully Google keeps improving. And obviously there's a bunch of midterm steps where you're like, why is Google ranking Forbes for best blenders or something like that? And there's like missteps along the way and that's going to happen. But if we look at the long game, I think we're just doing the right things that are going to basically parlay into great outcomes, regardless of what happens with Google updates or if SGE takes over, whatever the case is, like we're kind of building for that long-term game.
Okay. And what is your take on SGE? Are you guys already incorporating that or not at all or anything like, where do you see that going? Just seeing as you mentioned
it's really hard to predict, and that's one thing that we try not to do too hard is we try not to lean on like any conjecture or speculation or strong predictions. We'll maybe bake about 20% of our portfolio of actions or services into experimental, and then sort of look at what is Lindy, which is like basically this fancy word for like what has lasted a long time is likely to last a long time more. What's not going to change? We've got most of our basket into those things, but with SGE specifically, the way we're preparing for that. One is just like this mental model of like the content's got to come from somewhere. So like there's probably going to be some sources and citations, and like there's already like citations on SGE and ChatGPT, the premium version at least. I don't know exactly, but the free one. So creating great content is going to allow you to be cited in those sources. And then more importantly, one thing that I worked on many years ago at HubSpot, I guess not that long ago, 2019, 2020, was what we called the surround sound SEO strategy. So the game of SEO typically played is going to be, we want to rank for a keyword. We want to rank for a high traffic keyword because that's high impact. That's a lot of people that could see it, and a highly relevant keyword, hopefully somewhere, in the vicinity of reaching people who might purchase from our business. But the way you do that typically in the traditional paradigm is you create a page. You create a page of content on your website and you rank your page. But there's a whole lot of terms that are really like the user intent is discovery or comparison. Like they're not just looking at one page, they're kind of gathering ideas to compare a bunch of different software services or a bunch of different product alternatives or service businesses. You could think about that like best live chat software or best SEO agencies, or even this versus that, or like Calendly alternatives. They don't just want one blog post from Calendly or from a Calendly alternative in this case to say, hey, we're the best one. They're not going to stop their search there. They're looking to compare 4, 5, 6 companies to build a spreadsheet of pros and cons, to build basically a table that says, do they have this feature? How much do they cost, right? Because they can bring that to their boss and say, hey, I recommend this tool based on this information. So they're looking at multiple sources. So at HubSpot, we saw that. We saw these listicles. We saw these alternatives pages. They converted very well in terms of conversion rate. And then we did a couple tests where we're like, what if we could also appear at number 1 on another website that we didn't own? So whether it's a review site like G2, or it's a blogger, or even a competitor, right? Or a loosely associated competitor. And we could see the data there as well in terms of referrals. And we're like, it actually converts really well also. And there's probably something we can't track as well, which is this idea of like, well, if you went to a proverbial cocktail party and you're like, hey, I'm looking for book recommendations, like, what are you guys reading? And you got 6 friends and one says, I'm reading Sapiens. And then the rest say other things. You're like, okay, Sapiens is on my mind now. Like I know about it. But if every single person in the group is like, I'm reading Sapiens, I'm also reading Sapiens, blah, 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 blah. You're like, I'm going to go to Amazon right now, or my local bookstore, and I'm going to buy Sapiens because everybody's talking about it. So in the same sense, like on a search results page, if you search best live chat software and every single page says you should try Drift, like you're probably going to try Drift, or at least it's going to be in your conversation. So that's a strategy that I've long believed in, even before SGE. But nowadays we're doing experiments where the surround sound SEO play actually gets you listed for SGE, quick answers as well, and ChatGPT. So if you search something like best SEO agencies, you'll get that generative answer. And they're taking that data from a bunch of these blog posts and associating that with the category. So it's actually a cool way to prepare yourself for the future of AI generated answers as well.
Okay, well, I mean, that is a very good way to look at it. I think that's a great strategy to have, really. Okay, so just getting back to a little bit more of, how you actually measure the success of your SEO agencies. I mean, your SEO efforts, excuse me. So what key indicators do you use to measure, your agency's SEO efforts?
I'll give you a simple answer, and then I'll give you the it depends answer, which is like every SEO's favorite answer. So the simple answer is we look at leading indicators and lagging indicators. And we've always been an agency that attributes ourselves to growth outcomes. So basically we map towards business outcomes and not just traffic outcomes. So the leading indicators typically in a search focused content strategy are going to be pages indexed, visibility, so impressions in search, rankings, like your number 1 through number 3 rankings, and then traffic. All of those things eventually, like those need to be in place to attract the traffic that's going to convert. And then the lagging indicators, if you could consider it lagging, would be like a conversion. This would be a lead, hopefully a qualified lead. And then in some cases, we have teams who have very advanced revenue operations and marketing operations teams who can help connect data sources. So we've got our marketing and website analytics with usually Google Analytics. And then they may have a CRM or product analytics, and we can sometimes actually stitch that together and say, we've attributed this much revenue to the content that we're producing. And then we can build that based on whatever attribution model we've agreed on. A lot of the time, last click, sometimes first click, sometimes multi-touch. That's, getting into the weeds a little bit. But the other answer is it depends. And that's really, it goes back to the goals of a company. And it's not always revenue. And actually, startups typically want revenue. They're very much driven by how much money are we putting into this? How much money are we getting out? And in what time frame? A lot of enterprises, especially if they haven't done a lot of content for the go-to-market, a lot of SEO for the go-to-market. They're looking at overall sort of visibility, specifically in relation to their competitors. So that's where share of search and search visibility comes into play. And then we'll often try to quantify that with some sort of an earned media value equivalent. So like if you were to buy this traffic, how much would that cost? So it really just depends on what the goal they're aiming for is. But we always attach it to some meaningful business metric, you know?
Yeah. Okay. I have to ask, Alex, what role or how do you see B2B marketplaces, like say for instance DesignRush, playing a role in helping businesses really connect with these types of agencies like yours that can meet the growth of marketing needs?
Yeah, so I think hiring an agency is actually really hard. I was reading April Dunford's book on, I can never remember the title, and I hate this because I mention it quite a bit, but it's something around sales and sales messaging. But she opens it up by saying basically like, oh, do you think selling is hard? Buying is harder, right? Even though we have an abundance of information on social media and these listicles and the surround sound stuff I was talking about, you can search for all of this stuff. It's very difficult because there's a high pressure or a high risk of failure, especially with an agency, because ostensibly that's going to be a long-term engagement. You know, most people don't hire an agency just for a one-off audit. It's usually not the most impactful thing. So let's imagine you're going to work with somebody for 12 months to build out your paid acquisition strategy, or in our case, your organic strategy, and they're going to be charging $10,000, $15,000, $25,000 a month, whatever it is. That's a huge investment. And there's a varying degree of quality. And to some extent, you can sort of fake expertise. So you can, no one's stopping anybody from writing anything they want on LinkedIn. You can pull a chart from Ahrefs. It doesn't even have to be a website you've worked on. There's this kind of joke. I think my former boss, Pep Laya, talked about it, where, you know, if you were at like a company that grew from 10 million ARR to 100 million ARR, or in my case, I worked at HubSpot, right? And you have every marketer, 250 of them being like, I helped company X grow to $1 billion in revenue. And it's like, like this, you can fake social proof to an extent. And it's very hard to understand who's legit, and it's not just who's legit, but who's right for me, right? There's a ton of companies that, like, I think we're very good at organic growth. I like to think so. We're not right for everybody. So like there's this matching problem too, where it's like, are we the right agency for an incredibly technical developer tools platform? Maybe. Are we also the right agency for like a consumer packaged goods, like consumer, content play? And that's not apparent either. So yeah, I think these marketplaces do a great job at leveraging sort of information equality and matching to get the right service provider to the right company. So I see a big role in them.
Okay, now Alex, I'm quite interested in hearing more about how you folks are doing link building nowadays. So first of all, what is your approach to link building in 2024? Experts I know are arguing, and I said earlier we were going to get into this a little bit later, but experts I know are arguing right now that quality beats quantity. So I know there was a time that, people were pushing out a bunch of content, and now people are focusing more on quality. So I'm wondering, where do you guys stand with that now?
Yeah. Well, ideally you want a high quantity of quality. So like ideally you don't have a trade-off, but I get what you mean. With link building, it's definitely about quality. There's still a ton of really crappy, really spammy link building plays. PBNs, all that stuff still exists, really thin, crappy websites that you get links from. Our link building strategies are primarily fall into, I would say, 3 buckets, with some extenuating circumstances given the opportunities that a company has. And I'll give you one example of those after this. But the 3 buckets would be content or relationship-led link building. So basically writing guest posts, basically partnering with other people who are writing guest posts, creating great quality for other websites, and putting a link in. That's really simple and straightforward. I think a lot of people are doing that. There is digital PR link building. So this is the big play here now is there's kind of a synergy between the content that you create and the links you attract. And the idea here is that if you create novel, interesting, new information, if you do original research, or even curate like a statistics post, but like you have something, an asset that you can use as outreach. specifically for bloggers or for journalists who need new information. They've got a lot of stuff they need to produce, and they're always looking for new stuff and new ideas. Can you provide that for them? So we've done original research, white papers and studies for some of our clients, and use that as fodder for outreach. And then the third bucket is passive link building, and that's just part of our content strategy in general, which we took this term from Nassim Taleb, called the barbell strategy. And it's basically a risk allocation model where in financial investing, you avoid the middle because there's hidden risks, and you weight your portfolio heavily, in his case, on safe bets, right? Like very unlikely to lose all of your money. Maybe that's 80% of your portfolio. And for us, like we look at that as product-led content, as SEO-focused content, stuff that like we can build models and we can predict to a certain degree what's going to happen. And then 20% in the financial sense would be like incredibly risky, could go to the moon, could lose all your money type stuff. And then you get exposure to the upside. And for us, we've called that buzzworthy content. And that's what we put passive link magnets in. We put that into that bucket. So that could be things where we reverse engineer pages that are getting a ton of links from other websites, from competitors, or even from other industries. There's templates, there's formats that people tend to link to more often. What is X keyword, right? Definitional content, statistics posts, so content marketing statistics, anything where like you imagine a blogger being like, I need something to link to, like what kind of searches or what kind of reference material would they use? And then those are just going to attract a large amount of organic links as well. Oh, and sorry, the extenuating circumstance. So sometimes people will have specific strengths that we can use, either for content production or for link building. We're working with one early stage company now where the founder is incredibly influential. He just started this new company in the last year or so, and he's got tons and tons of podcast interviews and article mentions and guest post bylines, like in the dozens, 50, there's like 50 or 60 of them, and they're all using his outdated title. So it's like we can just go reach out and say, hey, can you update this to the new website, right? So sometimes there's like link reclamation, broken link building type things. I would say that's like less than 5% of our efforts for link building.
Okay. So Alex, I'm quite curious, what would you say is your favorite type of digital PR campaign?
Well, my favorite type as a consumer is net new information. I think it's good for the internet. But my favorite type as a creator is going to be those like curated posts, right? Like, so doing definitional glossary type content or statistics pieces because they're easy and they're cheaper to produce. Original research done well is actually incredibly expensive. And you've got to find novel, like noteworthy insights, because if your research is boring, like nobody's going to link to it, and you might just waste a bunch of money, surveying a bunch of panelists, and it's like it doesn't do anything. But no, I wish more companies would not just conduct research, but like a lot of companies have really interesting first party data that they could anonymize, and I love that stuff. Like I remember back in the day, BuzzSumo would do a lot of these. They're like, oh, we analyzed 3 million headlines, and here's the patterns we saw. Like, oh, this type of emotion works better in headlines, and the shareability is higher if you put a number in it, or things like that. Like aggregated, anonymized first party data is super cool.
So just looking again at the, just circling back, sorry, at Jasper and the work that you did there, but it seems that quantity was like a key player in the platform's growth. I mean, there must have been a catch there as well.
If you just think about it like from first principles, like you like the more you publish, the more potential you have to rank and the more potential traffic you have. So like it's like math, right? Like there's a mathematical model you can use, and there's sort of diminishing returns to that. So if you publish 100 articles a month, like you may not get like a 2x return from 50 articles per month, just depending on like how much search potential there is, like, and some of it's unsustainable, so it might eat into other programs that you could have invested in. So you have to find those numbers for yourself. But like it merely, like, publishing more gives you more opportunity to rank. And then there's like these secondary things where it's like topical authority. Does that matter? How much does that matter? Like, like that's Google's black box. We don't know exactly, and we don't know like exactly what that means in like the machine learning sense. But if you're to publish 100 posts on consumer finance and somebody else has 10, all things equal, you're probably looked at as more of an expert. Thus, Google has some sense that you could be trusted more, and hopefully all of those 100 get lifted because of that. I don't know exactly. I mean, there's a lot of conjecture in that. And then for the link building as well, the more content you're publishing, the more opportunities you have to build organic links as well. All that said, like, quality has to be in place. You can't, obviously, as we've seen with some of these case studies, these AI driven things, the SEO heist is the famous example. Your charts look like Mount Everest. It's like they go up really fast, often based on non-viable business keywords anyway. So it's like arguable if it was even worth it in the first place. And then Google catches on, and then all of the traffic goes away. And now all of a sudden you're in the hole, and you're like fighting against like basically a manual penalty or just a quality issue where it's like now you've got to dig yourself out of this hole. So quality's got to be a thing too.
Okay, so just moving on a little bit now. I know that Omniscient mentions that, it solves like real business metrics and not vanity metrics. Now, I'd like to take a little bit of a closer look at that. So how do you folks differentiate real business metrics from vanity metrics?
Yeah, it depends on the business model. So if it's product led, we can usually trace that to revenue, and that's the ultimate. Like, we can say like we have generated this much revenue given this attribution model with its own flaws, but we've charged this much money, you've gotten this much out. Here's your return on ad spend, essentially. Here's your ROI. You can't always do that. So then sometimes you've got to use qualified lead metrics, especially if it's an enterprise software company, maybe even further up the funnel where it's like they don't even have like, it's not even a demo request. It's like a webinar or a gated offer, and then you're in MQL territory. But some meaningful metric, some meaningful action or engagement that somebody takes on the page. And it's not about the specific metric in that case. It's really about what we don't measure, which I already mentioned that some do care about traffic, obviously relevant traffic, but we're generally not saying like, hey, we got this much traffic, this is a win. Because it doesn't matter if the traffic's not relevant. You can write about a whole lot of things that are irrelevant to your business that have tons and tons of search volume, but if it doesn't translate to meaningful business metrics, if it doesn't translate to revenue, if it doesn't translate to leads, what was the actual purpose of it? It's sort of it's a distraction, and it can also be a sort of addiction, because the dopamine rush you get from the traffic going up and to the right, it's hard to get off of that. And my co-founder David actually wrote this blog post called The Traffic Trap that goes more into that sort of goal setting and incentives model, that when you incentivize merely based on traffic, you can game that and basically come up with all these like irrelevant posts, and you get into this cycle where, traffic dropped because this blog post that generated a lot of traffic dropped, and now I've got to figure out how to fix that or replace that. And then it takes your eye off the ball. It takes your eye off of the things that actually would have moved the needle, which may only bring in 100 searches a month, but those 100 people are like perfect for what you actually sell. Other vanity metrics, people talk about them all the time. It's like pages per session. Pages per session is actually not the worst, because it does sort of like, it does incentivize some user experience metrics, and it shows that your content's good enough to be read. I don't know how correlative it is to business outcomes. The worst one is when people say stuff like bounce rate, because it's like some blog. First off, bounce rate is calculated in different ways, so that's one thing. But like a high versus low bounce rate, there's no good bounce rate. It's such a subjective metric. It depends on the industry. It also depends on the blog post, because like you could bounce off of a truly great blog post, and that person could share that via dark social or Slack with a colleague, and like they could be passing that around. But it's got a high bounce rate, so you're like, oh, this is a bad post, or like we need to optimize this somehow. But it completely did its job. So there's things you just got to think like, how does this actually matter in like approximate goal sense, or how does this correlate to approximate goal that we care about?
Okay, so how did you really quantify like the overall business impact of your content and SEO efforts, would you say, in the case of Jasper, of course?
Oh, well, they had a great internal team that helped us do a lot of that stuff. Like, they were one of those cases where we could stitch together all the data, and the case study goes into those metrics in terms of like the revenue attributed. I think we used a last click model, but yeah, we were able to effectively say, like, of the content we published, like this grouping of content, how much of that translated into conversions, and how many of those conversions, free trials or freemium users, translated into paying customers, and then basically backcasted that into here's how much revenue was attributed to the content, right? And then you can basically calculate the ROI based on how much they paid for the content.
Okay, so Alex, just considering your focus on long-term results, as you mentioned earlier as well, What would you say is the time frame that you typically would expect to see the curve of growth really going upward when structuring SEO and stuff like that?
Yeah, I don't want to say it depends again. It's like the worst cop out answer. I also don't want to give you like everybody says like 3 to 6 months or 6 to 12 months, which is also sort of a cop out answer because it's an average. You've got a couple dimensions here. So one, we actually have a blog post on this too, called Content Economics. But the power of your domain, right, in isolation, like the more powerful, the better. And powerful could be domain rating, domain authority, whatever metric you're using. It's basically the quantity and quality of backlinks. And your existing content portfolio, right, for topical authority matters. The power of your competitors or indirect competitors, organic competitors, because even if let's say like you're a newer domain or like you don't have a big backlink profile, if none of your competitors do and you're in this open green space, you're going to compete a little bit better as well. And then the velocity of your program. So like you're going to get results faster. Like if you think about it, like I'm like a really novice jiu-jitsu practitioner. I'm still a white belt and I don't go to class often. So I'm not like improving, right? Like I'm going like twice a week, if that. And if I went 5 times a week, I would get to a blue belt in like half the time. And there's a level where like investing in content, if you do too little, you literally don't grow. And same as jiu-jitsu, like if I went once a month, every time I would go, I would be relearning the same things. So I'd be basically staying in the same place. And if you're publishing 1 post a month, probably going to be a similar case. And then there's like the overinvestment case where it's like in fitness, jiu-jitsu, whatever, like I'm going to start breaking my body and getting injured. And like I'll have to take a couple steps back. And you could think about that, like the AI generated content where you're doing 1,000 posts a month or even human generated where you're spending way too much money on it and you're like you probably should have spent that on other things too, because now it's an opportunity cost and you've got diminishing marginal utility of the content. So there's a sweet spot, but I like, so we use this phrase in a lot of our marketing materials. It says we work with ambitious B2B companies, because it's not about whether you're a startup or you're an enterprise. It's really like, how committed are you? Because if you're committed and you're ambitious and your velocity is at a certain level, we can see results a lot faster, right? 16 pages a month is going to go a lot faster than 8. It's going to go a lot faster than 4. So those are the things that matter. And I can give you this answer too. So like 3 to 6 months, you're going to start to see results at a good pace. That may be rankings, that may be traffic, that may be conversions. That all depends on the aforementioned dimensions. But no matter how fast you go, no matter how much you invest, it's always like, it's a compounding channel. So it's always going to be more the longer you do it. It's going to compound on itself. So like if you go really fast in year 1, year 2 is probably still going to be better.
Okay, so Alex, when you say strategic work, right? We kind of get the sense that you do your work knowing that it's right, and you just prepare to meet the timing whenever it comes. Is that correct in saying it that way?
Yeah, I mean, we'll still map out growth objectives, and we don't call them forecasts because you can't really forecast SEO in the same way that you can other efforts. Like probably sales is one of those things you can control a lot more, and with a lot more data, you can get more accurate about like by this month, by this date, we can expect this many leads, this many closes, this many, etc. There's a lot that we can't control with Google's algorithm. So we've sort of got an intermediary. But when we're coming up with strategies, and especially our search TAM, the overall potential, we can say that with a degree of certainty, here's the overall traffic we could achieve. Now let's like move this scale in one direction or the other and say like, do you want to go faster? Like in this timeline, we could potentially expect this much traffic, right? And we can basically just estimate the average amount of traffic for a page and your average conversion rate. Very, very loose, very high level, but we can at least have some sort of a target or some sense that like if everything went right, here's a potential outcome. And then we just try to execute against that, but we never establish something that's as specific as like, we're forecasting these results on this date. Could be more, it could be less, but we don't want to say like, this is specifically what to expect on March 1st, 2025.
Okay. So, how do you balance results expectations with the investments in long-term growth, especially, in content marketing and SEO?
It's a really good question. I don't know if we always do it perfectly. One big factor is actually having somebody that understands how this works to a degree. you get somebody who's like, hey, I know that SEO is not, 2 weeks in, 4 weeks in, we're seeing all of the results, right? So a lot of it is coming together and dreaming up an ideal outcome. We're about building these growth programs that have like ambitious goals, but then also setting expectations as to like, you might not see it all in month 1, you might not see it all in month 3. And then as we go along and execute on the program, it's about communicating leading indicators, directional progress. These could be micro wins, right? Like you've published a page that's like a core, super relevant bottom funnel keyword, and it's sitting on page 5. And then the next time you check in, it's sitting on page 2, and you're like, we're getting closer, right? Like we're moving in the right direction. Again, these could go back to the aggregate leading indicators of keyword rankings, pages indexed, overall impressions in Google Search Console. As long as we're seeing those metrics move in the right direction, we're confident that the rest is going to come. So it's sort of a combination of like, mapping out the North Star, but not saying it's going to come on day one, and figuring out ways to say like, we're progressing, like keep on keeping on, but we're going in the right direction. And if we're not, identifying why and diagnosing that and figuring out how to basically alter course or iterate. Because that's important too. You don't just want to like have this sunk cost fallacy where you're like, oh, we have this plan, it's a 2-year plan, and a year in you're like not seeing any results, and you're like, well, we should probably change the plan, right? And we should use data to inform that.
Yeah, 100%. I'd say definitely after like the 6-month mark, you can probably also already tell like, I wonder if this is going the way we want to, right? Yeah. Okay, so Alex, just as we kind of start to wrap up today's episode, I'm also really interested to hear some of your, future outlooks in the realm of SEO and such as well. Now, if I had to ask you to name, say, your biggest SEO failure in 2023, what would it be?
Oh, man, we've there's always challenges with certain clients. One thing we've learned is that like your history dictates a lot of your future. So understanding what a company has done before, and if it's good quality work, is really important for the work that we build upon that. So if somebody's got a library of content that's been diluted in focus, or it's thin, low quality, or there's a pretty toxic backlink profile, we really have to spend the time up front to clean that up and make sure that we're setting ourselves up on good foundations. But I think a bigger mistake was sort of getting shook in the market when the market started to question the value of SEO, and like when all this AI chatter was going on. About a year ago, I would say like probably March until June last year, it was really like everybody was uncertain about like, is Google search going to continue to be a thing? And it's one of those things, you run a business that's heavily dependent on that. There's a whole lot of cognitive biases that can come into play. But even we started to second guess, and you zoom out now and you're like, well, of course, at least right now, it's still by and large the largest traffic provider for almost every website. In B2B, it's like, it just, Rand Fishkin and SparkToro just put out a study on this. Like the closest competitors are like 10x lower or even more. So it's like, even if it goes away in the future, what are you going to do now in the present that's the alternative, right? Like there's this very simple, like you got to grow. So like what are your options? Like it may not be like here in 10, 20 years in the exact same format. And then the way we were doing SEO and content, like I told you, it was very based on like kind of the user and like very long-term vision. So it's like, even if SEO changes or goes away, or it's all generative answers, I still think there's value in the types of content that we're doing. So I think like my mistake was not being calm, or equanimous would be my favorite word there. We got a little shook.
Yeah, of course. I even did. I think a lot of us did. And that was a question that I was asking a lot of our SEO guests that we had on the podcast since last year. It's like, how is this going to change search? Are we going to have to start catering to AIs now? Like AI chatbots and stuff. But yeah, I don't think, from what you're also saying, I don't think it's necessarily going to come to that. It is Google at the end of the day. And it's funny that you mentioned Rand, because we just had him on the podcast as well not too long ago, actually quite recently, and his episode is live. You should go check that out. He's an awesome guy. Okay, so if you had to say a really big success that happened to you in the last year, what would it be?
Well, for our agency, we're still relatively small, like 15-ish full-time. I'm doing estimates here, and then like a ton of freelancers and contractors, especially writers. We're small, but yeah, like halfway through last year, we started working with like tons of these extremely large and well-known companies. And at first I was like, what's happening here? And I was a little bit like insecure. I'm like, can we do this? Why aren't you hiring like a 1,000-person agency or whatever? And obviously there's tons of reasons that people would hire us, but like you have like your doubts and insecurities and like all of that stuff. And then starting to work with them, I'm like, oh, we're good at this. Like, because there's this whole second side of SEO, or really anything. And I wrote a LinkedIn post about this, but like the non-work work, the meetings and the stakeholder buy-in and alignment that surrounds like the work that you do, the spreadsheets or the content or whatever kind of like artifacts you're creating. And because all of us, we three founders at Omniscient, came from backgrounds where we worked at large companies and leadership roles, we all kind of knew how decisions got made. We knew how software was bought, how agencies got brought in. We knew how different personalities could affect throughput, and how to sort of mediate those issues when they come up. We knew how complex interpersonal issues get worked through. And a lot of enterprise services, or a lot of enterprise SEO, that's my experience, but like I'm sure it's the case for paid and CRO or whatever else you're doing. The work is the same complexity, sometimes even easier, because you have fewer sort of competitive issues. Like you've got a lot of foundations built up. So a lot of the work ends up being like more of the emotional intelligence side. So our biggest win last year was like, one, getting these clients, getting in the door, but then two, like building confidence and realizing like, oh, like we're good at this. Like we can give them actually results that a lot of these larger agencies can't give. So that was cool.
That does sound cool. I think there's a lot of satisfaction, I think, that comes with being able to pat yourself on the back and be like, damn, okay, we're doing it, like this is amazing. But on that note as well, Alex, I wonder, in your career, there must be people that you really look up to and see as mentors. And I'm wondering who those people are for you, or even if it's just people that you follow to stay updated on the latest like trends and stuff, like who are you looking up to right now?
Yeah, totally. So I've definitely had a lot of mentors, and I'll probably miss some here, but like Pep Laya, I worked at CXL, so he was a boss of mine, but I have forever looked up to him, and look at what he's doing, and I'm like, oh, it's a smart move, and we'll catch up every now and then. Yeah, when I was in the CRO space, like Matt Gershoff, Andrew Anderson, I had these great people who would kind of teach me the ropes. And then now this guy, Greg Greenberg, who lives in the New York area, like he's been teaching me a lot of like the enterprise space, and like how to operate within that, and like how to build cases and presentation decks and whatnot. And then more so on like the content and SEO side, I follow a lot of different people. It's not always just like straightforward content. But when I think of content, I think of Tracy Wallace. Like I read her newsletter. I think of Ronnie Higgins. I read anything he puts out. Lily Ray. I follow her like Google updates and like more of the technical and the SEO side of things. Tommy Walker. Tommy Walker's always putting out great stuff. He's a deeply intelligent, like he knows more about storytelling than anybody I think I've come across. Like an underrated voice is Ryan Farley. He's the founder of Lawn Starter, and that was the first company I worked at out of college. But he's an absolute genius with customer acquisition and growth. And he's not posting on LinkedIn or doing anything, but he's absolutely like a maven at this stuff.
Now, Alex, the final question I have for you is, how do you feel being on the list of the biggest marketing influencers in the US in 2024?
Yeah, I have a conflicted relationship with influencer stuff. on one hand, it's very good for business. It's to be known, right? You have to be known before somebody hires you in some sense. I like writing and I like sharing ideas, and I do my own podcast. So, the more awareness I have, the more I can get those ideas out. But I don't necessarily always enjoy being sort of front and center, and like a part of me, like sometimes I'll spend a full day or 2 days just working in spreadsheets, and I'm like, this is deeply peaceful to me because there's this I think it's more about like the ecosystem that we have to operate in now. Everything's sort of algorithmically delivered, and like algorithms have run our lives in hidden ways for a long time, but it's so much more apparent now. I feel like social media sites have sort of killed the blog, the traditional blog in some ways. Obviously, you can distribute it through SEO, but like back in the day, people would just write random stuff, and you could share it on Facebook, and people would like click the link, and now you see no links on any of these sites. Like LinkedIn disincentivizes it. LinkedIn's the main place for B2B influencers, and like there's a certain format that you kind of, I don't know if you have to follow, but like your brain starts to think in those ways, and I don't necessarily like conforming my brain and my thought pattern to the things that the platforms incentivize. So I'm conflicted about it. I like that ideas can spread. I like that what we're doing can get more attention because I think what we're doing is good. But the landscape of content and influence now is like I have. They're not all positive thoughts that I have there. So.
Okay. And just once again, just before we wrap up as well, do you think that personal branding is like the way to go for growth right now?
I think you have to love it. That goes back to the whole like conflict on influence and putting out content in general. But I think if you force it, it's probably not going to work, and then you're also going to hate it, and it's going to be unsustainable. So I don't think it's right for everybody. Specifically in the case of like, let's say, like a lot of people are like, you should post on LinkedIn, you should build a following there. There's a finite amount of attention on LinkedIn too, just like Google search results. Like it is sort of a finite pie, and the people who are really good at it, who really like it, they're going to do really, really well. And then a lot of people are going to do okay. And then a lot of people are going to peter out and do not well at all. And I don't think it's necessary to build a personal brand and to be on these platforms or to put content out in the world under your personal name. There's a ton of people I know who are like super successful, really smart, and you just never hear from them, right? Ryan Farley, I just mentioned him. So I don't think it's always, you don't have to do it. I do think it's a leverage if you do. Like Pep Laia is really good at that. Dave Gerhardt, right? You see these names all over the place, and they've obviously invested, and like they've got leverage because of that. So I think when you do it well, it's really, really impactful. You don't have to do it, and I wouldn't feel pressure to do it.
Alex, thank you so much for everything. Actually, this has been extremely insightful and just really valuable. Thank you for sitting down with us today, really.
Cool, thank you, and thanks for the great questions. This was fun.
That wraps up our conversation with Alex Burkett. If you're on the hunt for a world-class agency's expertise, whether it be in SEO, web development, or to refine your next content strategy, look no further than DesignRush.com/marketplace. Here you'll find a curated selection of agencies ready to bring your ideas to life. Remember to like this podcast and subscribe to our channel for more engaging discussions with industry leaders. Again, I'm your host, Bianca Mayer. Stay curious and join us for the next episode.